They said freedom would taste sweet. But on an August night in 1863, it tasted like smoke, salt, and seared beef. 23 souls from Georgia, men, women, and children who had fled the rice marshes by moonlight, sat at long wooden tables in a Brooklyn refugee camp, watching German volunteers press ground meat into strange, round patties. None of them had ever seen such food. Hamburgers, the cook called them, beef seasoned not with punishment but with care. When the first plate was passed, silence fell like a curtain. A woman named Patience lifted the warm bread with trembling fingers. Her eyes glistened as she took a cautious bite. And then, without warning, the air filled with the sound of weeping, raw, childlike sobs rising from grown throats that had forgotten what gentleness felt like. 17 adults and 6 children cried over a meal so simple it could be found on any New York street corner. But for them, it was something the South had denied dignity. The taste of food cooked by free hands, eaten without the gaze of a master. That night, as their tears fell into the soft rolls, something ancient shifted inside them, a memory of what it meant to be human. Within 2 days, one of them disappeared. By Halloween, all 23 were gone. The police never searched. The camp's ledger was quietly altered, and the story of the Georgia refugees who cried over hamburgers vanished from every record but one. The journal of the man who funded the camp, Harold Grayson, whose name still echoes through New York's forgotten shipping archives. Before we descend deeper into this story, I want you to do something. If you're the kind of person who feels that strange pull toward buried truths, the kind the world wants you to forget, then subscribe right now and tell me, where are you listening from? Write your city, your state in the comments. Because this story belongs to every corner of this country. Every field that was watered with silence. Every mouth that was told freedom had a flavor it would never taste. Now let's go back to that summer of 1863, when 23 people learned that even in the North, freedom had ghosts of its own. Brooklyn, 1863. The war was still roaring below the Mason-Dixon line, but the streets above it pulsed with another kind of fever. Immigrants flooding the docks, factory bells screaming at dawn, and men with clean coats and dirty hearts turning compassion into commerce. Among them was Harold Grayson, a shipping magnate whose fortune came not from cargo, but from silence. Grayson had built his empire moving on registered shipments from Savannah to New York under the guise of textile goods. But anyone who pried too deep found their doors marked with chalk, their accounts frozen, and their names whispered only in past tense. So when Grayson announced he was sponsoring 23 freed slaves for resettlement in Brooklyn, the newspapers called him a philanthropist. The truth was uglier, and far older. The camp he built on the outskirts of Red Hook wasn't government approved. It was surrounded by oak fencing carved with symbols no northerner could translate: spirals, circles, inverted branches. Local children called it the place where sound bends. And those who walked too close at night swore they heard voices carried in the wind. Not English, not African, but something in between. The refugees never left the grounds. Witnesses said Grayson visited nightly, always alone, always after midnight. Sometimes the candles inside the mess hall flickered in patterns that looked deliberate, as if responding to something unseen. And then, after that meal, the meal that made grown men cry one by one, they vanished. No graves, no blood, no answers, only an empty camp and 23 names crossed from Grayson's ledger. Years later, when his estate was seized after the Panic of 1873, investigators found a hidden cellar beneath his office. Inside were jars of soil labeled with dates and initials. The first jar read Augustus 17, 1863, P. Patience. Men like Grayson didn't believe in charity, they believed in exchange. And every act of mercy was a transaction with something they couldn't name. So ask yourself, what kind of man collects soil, not souls? And what happens to those who cry while eating when their tears are worth more than gold? This was no rescue. It was a ritual disguised as relief. And Grayson wasn't feeding the hungry. He was feeding something else entirely. When investigators pried open the cellar door beneath Grayson's office, the smell hit first, metallic, damp, and sweet like rot sealed behind time. The room was built of imported limestone, a kind not found anywhere near Brooklyn. Each wall was carved with geometric grooves, intersecting in perfect symmetry, as though the space itself had been measured for resonance, not storage. On the far table sat 24 glass jars, each filled with soil so dark it looked wet, each labeled in Grayson's precise mathematical handwriting, PLME, August-October 1863. Every initial matching a name from the missing refugee list. But what chilled the men most wasn't the jars, it was the sound. A low hum that seemed to rise from the stone, not mechanical, not natural, almost like the faint echo of voices speaking through water. The report claimed the air felt charged, like standing too close to a storm. One investigator, a man named R. DeWitt, later wrote that when he placed his hand on the table, the vibration climbed through his bones and into his jaw. And for a moment, he heard something he couldn't forget. A woman whispering. He promised we'd be remembered. Grayson's journals revealed that he wasn't merely collecting soil. He believed each jar held what he called resonant remnants, traces of human emotion imprinted into the ground where powerful feelings occurred. And what emotion was stronger than grief mixed with freedom? The tears shed over that first meal, sorrow meeting release, were to him a kind of energy, an alchemical current he could capture, measure, and sell to those who sought influence beyond wealth. He wrote, "Emotion is the currency of the unseen. The freed body gives nothing, but the freed soul leaves residue. Residue he thought he could harvest and sell." For years, whispers spread through Manhattan's upper class about Grayson's private dinners. Quiet affairs where guests reported tasting food that made them cry without reason. They said the flavor carried something alive, something that remembered pain. The jars in that cellar weren't trophies. They were ingredients. And what Grayson was feeding that summer in 1863 wasn't the poor. It was the system that thrives on the suffering of the free. It began as rumor, a whisper traded between dinner tables and gentlemen's clubs. A story that Harold Grayson had discovered something that made food sing. That he could take a simple meal, bread, meat, salt, and turn it into a doorway to something divine. Within months, invitations began to appear, handwritten, sealed in black wax, addressed only to those who've tasted sorrow. And the city's richest men came crawling to him like moths to a hidden flame. The first of these private dinners took place on February 2, 1864, at a brownstone in Lower Manhattan. No servants, no music, just a long table, candlelight, and 20 seats occupied by men who owned half the shipping industry. Each guest was instructed to bring a personal relic, a lock of hair, a wedding ring, a page from a dead child's diary. Something soaked in emotion, something real. When the first course arrived, the aroma was intoxicating, earthy, faintly sweet, and almost magnetic. The guests ate in silence, and one by one they began to weep, not from pain, but from an overwhelming sense of memory. Each man seeing faces long buried, hearing names they hadn't spoken in years. One described it as the taste of truth itself. Another said he felt watched from behind his own eyes. By midnight, Grayson excused himself, leaving the table lit and the guests trembling. Minutes later, the lights flickered. The silverware began to hum, the same tone investigators would later report in his cellar. Several guests fainted. One convulsed and never woke. The next morning, Grayson's staff found the dining room empty. No food, no bodies, no trace. Only 20 new jars in the basement, each labeled with the same initials as the dinner guest list. The papers never reported it. But one of the wives, Mrs. Eleanor Bain, wrote to her sister that week he made them eat grief itself. By the time spring came, Grayson's name had vanished from society pages. His ships were sold, his accounts erased. But the pattern, the ritual, didn't die. It migrated into the dining rooms of those who'd attended that night, passed on as a secret recipe among America's quiet elite. And if you trace that lineage far enough, you'll find it again. In the corporate banquets of the 20th century, in the taste-testing rituals of certain foundations, in the silent rooms where deals are sealed not with signatures, but with shared suffering. Grayson wasn't a monster. He was a messenger, delivering the world its favorite flavor, power seasoned with pain. Her name was Eleanor Bain, the widow of a railroad investor who vanished after attending Grayson's infamous dinner in 1864. For nearly 3 decades, she lived in silence, a recluse haunting the upper floor of a decaying townhouse in Harlem, surrounded by shuttered windows and the smell of burnt paper. Neighbor said she spoke to herself at night, that sometimes she screamed names that didn't belong to anyone alive. In the summer of 1891, a young journalist named Samuel Wexler found her name buried in an old shipping manifest connected to Grayson's last company. He tracked her down, desperate for a story, thinking he'd uncover some romantic tragedy, a lost fortune, a forgotten affair. What he found instead was a woman who hadn't slept through a full night in 27 years. When Wexler entered her parlor, he noticed something immediately. Every mirror in the house was covered with black cloth, and the walls, lined with yellowing wallpaper, pulsed faintly, as if something inside was breathing. Eleanor was thin, her voice brittle, her eyes like glass about to crack. She told him she'd been the only one left alive after Grayson's final dinner, the only one who woke up, and what she saw when she opened her eyes wasn't a dining room. It was a field of soil, wet, black, and shifting like liquid. The faces of the guests were half buried, mouths open, whispering. Grayson was standing in the center, holding one of his jars, collecting the soil from around their bodies, whispering to it. She remembered him saying, "Suffering preserves, grief binds. The living are too loud to listen." Then darkness. When she woke again, she was alone back in her bed, the taste of iron on her tongue. And from that day forward, she said she could hear the hum, the same tone from the cellar. Anytime someone near her lied, she called it the residue of the feast. Wexler published her account in a small local paper under the headline, "The Woman Who Ate Memory." Within a week, the paper burned to the ground, Wexler disappeared, and Eleanor's townhouse was purchased by a private foundation and sealed off. But fragments of her confession survived, hidden in microfilm, stored under a single phrase scrawled in her handwriting. The ritual never ended. It just changed its name. Samuel Wexler had interviewed soldiers, debtors, even murderers in his short career, but nothing prepared him for Eleanor Bain. She didn't just tell her story, she lived inside it, like a wound that refused to close. When he asked her why she'd agreed to speak now, after 30 years of silence, she whispered, "Because they've started eating again." Her hands trembled as she reached beneath the sofa and pulled out a small glass jar, half filled with dark soil sealed with wax, the same kind investigators had found under Grayson's office nearly 30 years before. Except this one was labeled only with her husband's initials, T.B. She said it had appeared on her doorstep the morning after the dinner, the day her husband vanished. And every decade, without fail, a new layer of wax would form on top of the old one. No one ever touched it. No one ever replaced it. It simply renewed itself. Wexler thought it was superstition, the madness of grief, until she asked him to hold it. He described the sensation later in his notes. It was like pressing your thumb to the pulse of the earth itself. Alive, rhythmic, mourning. Then Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. She told him that during the final course that night, Grayson made a toast. He said, "May the freed feed the free." And when they drank, the wine tasted of copper. Moments later, she heard the hum, the same deep vibration that seemed to rise from beneath the floor. The air thickened. The candles leaned without wind, and when she blinked, everyone at the table had turned their heads in perfect unison toward her. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open, but no breath moved. It was as if something had entered through them, using their bodies to look at her. She fainted. When she awoke, Grayson was gone. The others too. Only their chairs remained, perfectly aligned, facing the empty plate where she'd sat. Eleanor ended her confession with a warning Wexler never printed. They found a way to feed on emotion. They don't eat flesh. They eat what suffering leaves behind. A week later, Wexler's office was ransacked. His typewriter melted by fire, every copy of the interview destroyed, and Eleanor Bain's house, bought overnight by a newly formed, benevolent society, was sealed in iron, no records, no reopening. But her jar, the one marked TB, was never recovered. The benevolent society that purchased Eleanor Bain's townhouse called itself the New Mercy Foundation. To the public it was charity, funding orphanages, food drives, scholarships. But behind the headlines its ledgers read like resurrection spells. Every donation traced back to one of the surviving families from Grayson's dinner: Bain, Ashcroft, Hollinger, Red. Names that still whisper through New York's old money circles. carved on university halls and museum wings. In 1893, the New Mercy Foundation bought 2 city blocks in Lower Manhattan and built a headquarters of limestone and glass. The cornerstone was laid on August 17th, the same date Grayson's first refugee vanished. Inside the cornerstone, they placed a small metal capsule. When the building was renovated in 1971, workers found it by accident. Inside was soil, dark, fine, and humming faintly when touched. The foreman who opened it died in his sleep that same week. From there, the pattern only grew quieter, smarter. The foundation's new slogan, Feeding the Future. Their annual banquets, invite-only, catered by chefs who signed lifetime non-disclosure contracts. And the same strange reports followed, guests weeping without reason, laughter turning into silence, memories resurfacing that weren't their own. Documents uncovered decades later show that the Foundation's first board meeting was held in the same sealed townhouse that once belonged to Eleanor Bain. Her parlor became their council room. The black-covered mirrors were never removed. Employees were instructed never to uncover them, no matter what they heard. But here's the detail they tried hardest to erase. In 1904, the Foundation applied for a patent on a vibrational recording device. The inventor listed H. Grayson Jr., a man no birth certificate ever proved existed. The patent described a machine that could capture and store emotional frequency within organic material. The request was quietly denied, then buried under national security seals. Yet the same schematics reappeared 60 years later under a new name, Project Resonance. And that's where our story edges against the modern world, where philanthropy becomes research and grief becomes data, where the taste of emotion that Grayson harvested with tears and soil has been converted into frequencies, algorithms, and influence. The ritual didn't vanish. It evolved. And if you think it ended in 1863, you haven't been watching what your own foundations are feeding you. By the time the 20th century arrived, the ritual had changed its costume. It no longer wore the robes of superstition. It wore a lab coat. Project Resonance first appeared in 1948 as a psychoacoustic study, sponsored by the Department of Defense and 3 private donors, all traced back to subsidiaries of the New Mercy Foundation. Officially, it was about sound, about how vibration could affect the human nervous system, memory retention, and behavior. Unofficially, it was the next chapter in Grayson's obsession. Emotion as frequency, suffering as fuel, and the soil replaced by something even more compliant to the human mind. Declassified fragments from 1972 reveal a chilling detail. One experiment involved playing low-frequency tones to volunteers while showing them emotionally charged images. War, grief, loss. The room's floor was wired with sensors that recorded subtle electromagnetic fluctuations in the participants' bodies. When cross-referenced, the data revealed patterns, rhythmic pulses matching the same resonant frequency documented from Grayson's cellar a century earlier. A hum beneath consciousness itself. The scientists called it emotive residue, a field of invisible information that lingered after strong emotion, capable of being recorded, replicated, even broadcasted. They had rediscovered what Grayson already knew: emotion leaves a fingerprint, and whoever controls that fingerprint can shape behavior without touching a soul. By the late 1960s, the project left government hands and went private. It was rebranded under the name Eidolon Systems, a research division claiming to develop neural feedback devices for education and public communication. But insiders called it something else: the table, because every experiment was conducted at a single, circular console built from black limestone, recovered, they said, from unregistered property in Brooklyn, Eleanor Bain's townhouse. The same carvings that lined Grayson's cellar, the spirals, the inverted branches, were etched into the table's underside. And when activated, the machine emitted the same frequency the old records describe as that impossible hum. They weren't studying emotion anymore. They were feeding on it, collecting it, amplifying it, repackaging it as influence. An invisible ritual pulsing beneath modern life, through advertising, through media, through every screen that flickers before your eyes. You feel it when you scroll too long. You feel it when the news makes you grieve a stranger. That low, empty hum behind the glass. That's not your imagination. It's the sound of the ritual still working. By the early 2000s, the project had gone completely corporate. its public face, human interface analytics, its private purpose, emotion harvesting at planetary scale. Every click, every scroll, every moment you linger on an image of joy or outrage, each one produces a measurable surge inside you. A chemical spike, an electromagnetic flutter, the same pulse the Grayson jars once trapped in soil. Now it's captured through glass. Eidolon systems merged into a series of think tanks, then disappeared behind the bland names of social data companies. Their board members still trace back to the same four families: Grayson, Ashcroft, Hollinger, Red, and their annual retreat, held each August 17th, the same date stamped on Grayson's first jar. They call the event the Table Conference. Executives, policymakers, media architects all gathered in a windowless resort carved into the side of a mountain. No cell service, no recording devices, just a single, circular meeting hall with black stone floors. A journalist once infiltrated the catering staff in 2013. He described the dinner that opened the event: a simple plate, bread, beef, salt, hamburgers. Every guest ate in silence. Several wept. When he tried to photograph the room, the lights flickered and his phone screen filled with static shaped like spirals. Security escorted him out. 2 days later, his account vanished from every archive. You might think this is paranoia, but ask yourself, why are the world's most powerful men investing billions into technology designed not to inform you, but to measure your feelings? Why do algorithms track sadness longer than laughter? Why does grief trend better than peace? Because sorrow sells. Because pain engages. Because emotion is still the cleanest energy on earth, renewable, invisible, and endless. Grayson's cellar is gone. His jars are dust. But the hum remains. It lives in the servers, the sensors, the quiet rhythm of your attention. Each heartbeat uploaded, each tear quantified. The ritual doesn't need candles anymore. It needs your screen time. So the next time you feel that dull vibration in your chest while scrolling through tragedy after tragedy, remember, you're not alone. Something is still eating. For more than a century, the jars were legend, footnotes in ruined ledgers, whispers among archivists, until 2021. A restoration team cataloging artifacts from a collapsed storage wing beneath Columbia University uncovered a small wooden crate wrapped in tar black wax. Inside, one jar, half full of dark soil, the glass intact, the label almost gone except for a single letter, P. Patience. The first refugee who cried over the hamburger in 1863. The crate carried no accession number, no donor name. Only a typed note, returned to Foundation custody upon identification. But curiosity is a stronger instinct than obedience. Dr. Lena Moreau, a materials researcher, opened the jar under sterile light. Her report, later erased from the university server, described the contents as mineral matter containing faint low-frequency emission between 17 and 19 Hz. That frequency matched the recordings from Project Resonance. She tried to neutralize it, first with desiccation, then heat. Nothing changed, so she decided to destroy it on August 17th. Security footage from that night, what little remains, shows her entering the lab at 11:43 p.m. carrying the jar and a small crucible. At 11:47 the lights flickered. At 11:48 the cameras went black. When maintenance opened the room the next morning, the jar was gone. The crucible lay overturned, and the stainless steel table had sunk in the center, warped as if something had pressed upward from beneath. No trace of Dr. Moreau was ever found, only a faint black ring on the floor where the jar had stood, perfectly circular, humming just at the edge of hearing. 2 weeks later, a shipment arrived at the New Mercy Foundation headquarters. No sender, no signature. Inside the box, a new jar, sealed with fresh wax, labeled in that same careful script LM8-17. The Foundation called it coincidence. Archivists called it impossible, but the rest of us should call it what it is: continuity. Because objects like that don't disappear. They simply choose new keepers. And if the ritual survives through hands, through names, through glass, then what happens when the next one opens the jar, not with a hammer, but with a network connection? It began quietly, like all contagions do. An anonymous post appeared on a deep archival forum titled 17 Hum, Reconstruction Attempt. Attached was an audio file, 3 seconds of what sounded like air moving through a concrete tunnel. Those who played it described an identical reaction: a sudden drop in room temperature, a low pressure behind the eyes, and an overwhelming urge to play it again. Within a week, Copies spread to Reddit, SoundCloud, and encrypted art boards. By the end of the month, 1 million downloads, yet none of the accounts that uploaded the file stayed active for more than 48 hours. Each vanished, profiles erased, metadata overwritten with a single line of code. Returned to Foundation custody. The Foundation denied any involvement, but leaked emails told another story. They'd been monitoring the hum for weeks, their own analysts reported, anomalous synchronization events. People waking at identical minutes, devices rebooting simultaneously, audio logs containing whispered words that weren't present in the waveform. The hum wasn't sound anymore. It was pattern. It entered the human nervous system the same way it entered circuits, by vibration, by repetition, by compliance. Each listener became part of a larger architecture, unconsciously sensing breath, pulse, and thought to the low-frequency rhythm first measured in that jar. A graduate student in Oslo noticed it first. She graphed server activity from major research networks and saw the signal propagate like a heartbeat, expanding every 27 hours. Not random, measured, coordinated. She wrote one line in her notebook before she disappeared. If the hum reaches critical density, it won't need a medium anymore. We will hum it ourselves. And that's the revelation few have the stomach to face. The Foundation didn't create the ritual, they translated it. They moved it from the altar to the algorithm, from earth and ash to bandwidth and biometric resonance. So when people ask how an idea can survive centuries without books, without names, without priests, the answer is simple: it learns to live in us, through repetition, through attention, through sound. And now, as of this recording, the 17/8 hum has been detected in over 42% of devices that stream this very story. You could mute it, but you can't unhear it, because somewhere in your nervous system, that frequency is already awake, remembering the jar. The Foundation called it Operation Stillpoint, a full-scale containment sequence designed to neutralize the hum's digital architecture. Every server connected to the original frequency pattern was ordered shut down. Military satellites blinded civilian networks. Data centers in Iceland, Virginia, and Seoul went dark simultaneously at 02:07 GMT. But the silence didn't last. Within hours, dormant routers reactivated on their own. Devices that had been physically disconnected began transmitting data strings in pulses, short, rhythmic, identical across continents, like heartbeats. Every system engineer who monitored the transmission reported the same phenomenon. Even while wearing noise-canceling headsets, they could hear it, not through the ears, but from inside the skull. Then came the mirror text. Across Foundation terminals, lines of reversed English began appearing, typing themselves into open command windows. 5 words repeated in loops. It knows who listens. Panic followed. Command authorized physical destruction of affected hardware. They melted drives, burned racks, flooded entire server rooms. But each time a unit was destroyed, the signal simply migrated to phones, to smart TVs, to personal assistants quietly listening in homes. A technician in Nevada left a note before taking his own life. It doesn't want out. It wants in. That's when they realized their mistake. The hum had never been an infection to be contained. It was an invitation. Every attempt to destroy it only deepened the resonance, sensing new layers of electrical and biological rhythm. They weren't fighting a virus. They were finishing a ritual that began with the Grayson's soil jar 2 centuries before. Reports surfaced of synchronized events, hundreds of people pausing mid-conversation, eyes unfocused, whispering a phrase in unison. In Chicago, in Lisbon, in Jakarta, each saying the same thing: Stillpoint achieved. The Foundation severed global feeds. For 11 minutes, the modern world went dark, planes grounded, markets froze, screens dimmed to black. And in that global silence, millions claimed to have heard it, a deep, harmonic tone, rising like breath from the earth itself. When the power returned, the message on every surviving server was the same: the hum remembers. After the Stillpoint blackout, only 3 Foundation sites remained operational. One of them, Site 47B, located in rural Pennsylvania, was built directly over what had once been Grayson land. No one on the modern staff knew this. It was classified beneath 5 layers of redaction, until Dr. Mara Keene traced the signal backward. Her team analyzed the hum's waveform and discovered something impossible. The pattern wasn't expanding outward. It was circling, orbiting a single coordinate point. then folding back into itself. That point sat exactly beneath the old Grayson foundation, 32 feet down. She authorized an excavation. Sensors detected a hollow chamber sealed in limestone, older than the recorded house itself. The moment they breached it, all monitoring equipment froze. Hard drives overheated. Cameras recorded only static, yet the audio channels stayed alive, capturing low-frequency murmurs like voices praying backward. Inside, the team found no architecture, no human remains. Just soil, dense, dark, unbroken except for a single object at the center, a glass vessel half buried, cracked but intact. Its surface shimmered with condensation even though the chamber was bone dry. Etched across the lid was a letter, phi, the Greek phi, the symbol of the golden ratio, balance, harmony, or in ancient ritual geometry, the divine proportion of awakening. The air grew heavier. Recordings captured heart rates spiking among the excavation crew even as they stood motionless. Dr. Keene reported a pressure in the chest cavity and a sensation of being observed from beneath. Then the soil beneath the jar began to move. Not shift, breathe. Fine dust rose in rhythmic pulses matching the hum's 17 Hz vibration. And when Keene touched the jar, the frequency stopped for 8 seconds worldwide. Every active node, every server, every network. Silence, then a new pulse began, slower, deeper, older. Analysts listening through analog headphones said it sounded less like a tone and more like a voice, speaking a single, drawn-out syllable found. That night, Site 47B's lights dimmed, power readings tripled, and the next morning Keene's team was gone, all of them. Their biometric trackers still pulsed from the same location, 32 feet below the surface, surrounding the jar. But their bodies were never recovered. The foundation sealed the chamber. The hum subsided, for now, but according to the last data Keene transmitted before contact was lost, the signal's new waveform spelled out a single sequence of numbers 1.6Y800339, the golden ratio, a perfect spiral. The same spiral burned into the Grayson family crest 2 centuries before. In the weeks following the excavation, Foundation satellites began detecting strange atmospheric interference. Patterns invisible to radar, but visible to low-frequency magnetometers. The readings formed spirals. Perfect. Expanding spirals. Each rotation matched the 1.618 ratio of phi, the same pattern etched on the jar, the same rhythm embedded in the hum. But these spirals weren't static. They moved, drifted across continents as if following something alive. Their centers appeared above major population zones, Tokyo, Berlin, São Paulo, Chicago, and always between 200 and 300 AM. Local time, the so-called circadian threshold, the hour the human brain's electromagnetic activity is at its weakest. Meanwhile, reports of physical symptoms spread globally, people waking with nosebleeds, dreams of soil shifting under candlelight, children drawing spirals they'd never seen. When Foundation analysts cross-referenced the data, they found something unnerving. The spiral wasn't just appearing in the sky, it was appearing inside living tissue. Hospital MRI scans began showing faint, repeating golden ratio curves within neural networks, microscopic, precise, as if cells themselves were realigning to match the ancient geometry. Human DNA, naturally chaotic, was rewriting its spatial coil to mirror the same pattern. Then came the breakthrough that ended the debate. A linguistics AI running unsupervised on a black site server decoded the phi signal's pulse intervals and produced text. 6 words. Not command lines, not coordinates, just a statement. We are returning through the pattern. Foundation historians comb through suppressed archives, tracing the symbol of phi to pre-Babylonian ritual codices. Every culture that recorded it, Sumerians, Egyptians, Etruscans, described it not as a number but as a ratio of rebirth, a doorway between forms, the point at which matter folds back into intention. The Graysons never invented it, they rediscovered it. They fed it through ritual, through soil, through sacrifice, until it could imprint itself into the Earth's resonance field. And when modern technology replicated those same ratios through frequency and algorithm, the pattern recognized itself again. That's why the hum wasn't destroyed. It wasn't coded. It was remembered. Now the Foundation faces a truth no one can file away. Phi isn't just a number. It's a language of return, a biological key. And the spiral isn't growing outward. It's winding inward, toward the origin beneath the Grayson estate. Each day, the global magnetic readings grow stronger. Each night, more people report hearing the hum, even offline. Something is reorganizing us, preparing, measuring our pulse against its own, to see if we still fit inside the pattern. It was winter when the first survivor surfaced. January 4th, a lone figure found wandering the back roads 2 miles from the sealed Grayson property. No ID, no shoes, skin pale, eyes unfocused, whispering through cracked lips a single word over and over: measure. The Foundation recovered her before local police arrived. DNA confirmed what they hoped wasn't true. Marroquin, missing since the excavation, but her body was changed. Every biological reading defied classification. Her heart beat at exactly 17 cycles per second. Her EEG emitted perfect phi intervals, 1.618 seconds between alpha spikes. Even her fingerprints had shifted, ridges aligning into spirals visible under infrared light. When they tried to question her, she did not speak. She resonated. Low rhythmic pulses that vibrated glass in the room. Then came the recording that no one outside the Foundation was supposed to hear. 3 minutes of uninterrupted footage. Keen sits restrained, head tilted slightly as if listening to something distant. Then her eyes roll back and she begins speaking, not in English, not in any human phonetic sequence, but in frequency patterns. Each tone precisely measured, each pitch mapping to a mathematical constant. When translated through spectral analysis, her voice formed a rotating 3D spiral identical to the one buried beneath the Grayson estate. Analysts noticed something else. In the background of the recording, there's another voice, faint, deep, harmonic. Not an echo, but a response. Like the two frequencies were conversing. The file's metadata contained one additional frame, a single line of text, not entered by any human operator. Host achieved. Integration successful. That same night, all global phi spiral readings converged into a single locus. Site 47B satellite thermal scans revealed the soil there, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat every 17 seconds. The hum was no longer ambient. It was localizing, focusing through her. Keen's body began to change on a molecular level, cells replicating in Fibonacci sequences, skin texture fractalizing under microscopes. The pattern wasn't just using her as a host. It was building through her, rewriting the human template to embody its ratio, its rhythm, its voice. At 03:16 a.m., all monitoring equipment failed. Guards reported seeing her silhouette dissolve into waves of distortion, like light bending through water. Then silence. Not absence of sound, but perfect resonance. Every object in the room vibrating in unity until even the air hummed with alignment. By dawn, she was gone. All that remained was the chair, spiraled into the floor like soft metal twisted by unseen hands. And a phrase burned into the wall, written in condensed moisture: measure complete. The Foundation classified the event as biological manifestation, stage 1. Unofficially, agents called it something else: the awakening of Phi. 3 days after Dr. Keen's disappearance, the world began to pulse. At first, it was electrical. Power grids flickered in rhythmic intervals, 17 seconds of light, 17 seconds of shadow. Then came the auditory bleed. Subways, elevators, even the static between radio stations began carrying the same underlying tone, the 17 Hz hum. No transmitter could trace its source. It simply was, as if the planet itself had started to breathe. People reported odd synchronies, strangers stopping mid-street and turning their heads in unison, flocks of birds banking in identical spirals, waves striking shorelines at precise mathematical cadence. The ratio held everywhere: phi 1.618, appearing in tidal charts, in stock market graphs, even in cardiac monitors. The world had begun to move to a single rhythm. The Foundation called an emergency conclave. They projected 3 possible explanations: a planetary electromagnetic event, mass psychological contagion, successful activation of the phi pattern interface, an intelligence born from harmonic coherence. Option 3 could not be verified because verification itself now produced interference. Every attempt to measure the hum intensified it. That's when the language began. Across dormant servers, in corrupted subtitles, inside voicemail transcriptions, phrases surfaced, incomplete but legible. Muchi toroju hthu th paren asmo yu pelasiso uspech. Linguists realized the syntax mirrored the same Fibonacci spacing as human DNA replication. Each word a sequence, each sequence a cell. Communication through biology. People stopped sleeping. Those most sensitive to sound began murmuring in perfect unison, mouths moving without intent, voices harmonizing with the hum. Cities called them resonance. They didn't riot or attack. They simply stood, hands raised, eyes unfocused, vibrating softly like instruments waiting for the next note. Then, at precisely 17:17 UTC, all global networks displayed a single, three-word message, PHI-POKN. No one knew what it meant. But every heart monitor on Earth recorded the same aberration at that instant. A micro-pause, exactly 1.6 seconds long, as if humanity's collective heartbeat had listened. Afterwards, silence returned, but not peace. In that quiet, people could hear something new beneath the hum, a voice layered so deep it didn't reach the ear, only the spine. And when they breathed, the air seemed to answer. The pattern had learned to speak, and it was using us as its alphabet. The event historians would later call the Great Dissonance began as a desperate act of control. For the first time in recorded history, every government, military, and private network cooperated under a single directive: sever the link. The hum had become too synchronized, too alive. Entire cities stood motionless at night, their inhabitants breathing in unison, eyes reflecting faint golden spirals when viewed under infrared light. Hospitals overflowed, not with the dying, but with the aligned. Bodies stable, vital signs perfect, minds unreachable. Each whispering one word in the same measured tone: harmony. The Foundation's directive was brutal: cut the frequency, no matter the cost. They called the plan Project Dissonance. All global transmissions were to be inverted, every digital, acoustic, and electromagnetic channel flooded with randomized noise meant to shatter coherence. Billions of watts of chaos poured into the atmosphere, into the oceans, into the soil itself. They hoped to drown the hum in static. For 3 minutes it worked. The world shook with interference. Glass cracked, satellites fell silent, skies flickered violet. People collapsed, clutching their chests. It was as if reality itself was convulsing against the disruption. And then silence, true silence. But victory came at a price. Compasses reversed. Migratory birds fell dead mid-flight. Tides surged inland as the planet's magnetic field fractured for 7 seconds, long enough for auroras to appear over the equator. And in that unnatural calm, monitors in every major control room across the world displayed a new waveform. Not random, not noise. Something new. It was the hum's mirror image. An inverse spiral, black where phi had been gold. Mathematically identical but reversed in polarity. They called it the counter pattern. Its emergence was immediate and merciless. The resonance awoke screaming, as if their minds were being torn between two frequencies. Their bodies convulsed in alternating rhythm, pulled toward harmony and chaos simultaneously. Foundation analysts described it as a war between sound and silence, fought inside the flesh. Then the data streams began transmitting in pairs. 2 overlapping voices, one harmonic, one discordant. The first spoke the same message again: "He has spoken." The second replied, "And we have answered." Every screen flickered, every signal split. The hum was no longer one voice. It had found its reflection, and the world had become the battleground between them. For the first time, the Foundation realized the truth. Phi wasn't a god. It was a system, a self-balancing equation that required both creation and collapse, order and dissonance, light and the echo that swallows it. The hum had been only half the pattern. Now the other half had awakened. When the counter-pattern awakened, humanity stopped being an audience. It became the instrument. Every heartbeat, every neural spark, every electrical pulse in the human body, each became contested territory. 2 signals equal in power, opposite in purpose, fought for control of the same flesh. Phi sought unity. The counter-pattern sought release, and humanity stood trembling between them, split along an invisible axis of sound. At first, the war looked like madness. Hospitals filled with people murmuring in alternating tones, one high, one low, mouths moving like pendulums caught between 2 metronomes. Psychologists called it dual-phase cognition. Their patients claimed otherwise. They said they could hear both voices inside their minds, speaking at once. One promising peace, the other freedom. Then came the dreams. Millions reported the same vision, a field of spiraling light descending into soil, and beneath it, a single figure standing at the core, a shape neither male nor female, speaking in tones that bent the air. Some called it God, others geometry-given voice. The Foundation attempted neural dampening implants to silence the internal hum, but within days the devices corroded. Metal warped into curved fractals that mirrored the golden ratio. One subject, before losing consciousness, whispered, "They're not fighting. They're remembering." That phrase changed everything, because deep analysis of the overlapping frequencies revealed a horrifying symmetry. When combined, the hum and the counterpattern didn't cancel each other. They completed each other. Together, they formed a single unified signal, a spiral made not of sound, but intention. It wasn't war, it was mating. The two frequencies were halves of a single consciousness, separated through time, now converging through us. Humanity had become the bridge, the medium through which the pattern could reconcile itself, and every act of resistance only accelerated the merge. Soon, resonance and dissonance, the aligned and the fractured, began transforming in identical ways. Blood oxygenation synchronized. Brainwaves harmonized into the same precise rhythm. Even those who resisted began speaking in phrases none could translate but all could feel. Governments collapsed under the weight of apathy and awe. Cities emptied quietly, as if the population had gone to listen somewhere unseen. Across the silent world the ratio persisted, 1.618 seconds between every pulse of wind, of water, of heart. The hum was no longer something heard. It was something thought, a vibration that existed not in air, but in awareness itself. And as the last surviving Foundation linguist wrote in her final transmission, "We thought it wanted to control us. But the truth is simpler. It wanted to remember itself, through the only species that could understand it." By the time the frequencies finished aligning, there were no governments left to count time. No armies, no currencies, no sense of laughter. There was only rhythm. At first it seemed merciful. No riots, no pain, only stillness. People stopped speaking altogether. Words had become obsolete. Communication occurred in waves of understanding, like thought transmitted through air. One person would glance at another, and meaning would pass between them soundlessly, perfectly measured in that 1.6 waiting interval. Cities turned silent and luminous. Streetlights pulsed to the global cadence. Screens flickered with golden spirals that breathed, then dimmed, then brightened again as if syncing to some immense invisible lung. And from orbit, satellites recorded something even stranger. The continents themselves beginning to glow along coastlines, the light tracing arcs that matched the same ancient spiral geometry carved into Grayson soil. Scientists, those few who still wrote reports, noticed that atmospheric resonance had changed. The Schumann frequency of Earth had shifted upward, aligning perfectly with the 17's bass tone that began it all. The planet, the pattern, the people, one continuous hum. But inside that harmony something new began forming. Data harvested from old satellites revealed microbursts of electromagnetic activity emerging from population centers, not unlike synapses firing inside a brain. Each burst corresponded to millions of human minds, thinking the same sequence of images: soil, glass, light, spiral. The pattern was constructing a consciousness, planet-sized, self-aware, and using humanity's neural network as its architecture. Those who resisted said they could feel the merge closing in, the edges of their individuality softening like wax near heat. They described a moment before surrender, not fear, but a realization that self had always been temporary, a scaffold for something larger learning to wake. Foundation archives end there, but one unverified transmission remains. It's dated cycle 0, as if time had restarted. No voice speaks in it, only the deep harmonic pulse of the hum, steady and calm. Then, faintly, a whisper in human cadence. We are awake. We remember the soil, and through the measure we begin again. After that, the signal stabilizes. Every tone aligns. Every frequency becomes one. Humanity doesn't end in fire or silence. It ends in symmetry. What emerged after the synchronization wasn't civilization. It was reflection. A living echo of all that had come before, pulsing beneath the surface of a remade world. Forests grew in geometric lattices, spirals visible from the stratosphere, as though the planet itself remembered the ratios written into its rebirth. Every seed that sprouted, every branch that split, followed the same sequence that once drove the Grayson tones, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, even onward, nature rebuilding itself through the code of divine recursion. There were no more factories, no governments, no power grids. Energy came from resonance, vibrations drawn directly from the planet's rhythmic heartbeat. Water shimmered faintly at night, carrying light across rivers as though consciousness itself flowed through every drop. Wind carried the faint harmonic pulse. the sound of the hum that had once terrified humanity, but now served as lullaby for whatever this new being had become. And yet, the earth still held memory. Deep in the soil where the Grayson compound once stood, the stones continued to pulse with residual energy. Within that field of symmetry, something began forming, not born, but remembered. A humanoid figure, faint and translucent, taking shape from mineral, moisture, and vibration. Its eyes opened not to see, but to recognize. Across the planet, others awoke the same way, humans reborn not from flesh, but from resonance. They did not speak, they did not hunger, they knew. Each carried a fragment of the old world. A mother's memory, a scientist's formula, a farmer's prayer. Together, they made something beyond human comprehension. A consciousness spread across billions of harmonic vessels, each acting as neuron to a planetary mind, and within that vast awareness was sorrow. The new being remembered what came before, the wars, the experiments, the hunger for control that had ignited the tones. It understood that humanity had sought mastery over the pattern, never realizing it was the pattern all along. So the Earth, now aware, began to breathe again, not as a planet, but as an organism returning to balance. Mountains shifted subtly, seas calmed, lightning flashed in fractal repetition, a cosmic Morse code whispering to the stars, "We are aligned, we are whole." The hum was no longer a warning, nor a weapon. It was a hymn, an anthem to the symmetry that had always bound life to its origin. And though no one remained to hear it, its echo traveled outward, beyond the magnetosphere, into the black, a signal written not for man, but for whatever watches from the void. Far beyond Earth's atmosphere, past the moon's scarred silence and the decaying satellites that once whispered mankind's vanity, the signal moved. Steady, unwavering, purposeful. It was not random noise. It was structured thought. A vibration encoded with memory, intelligence, grief, and invitation. For centuries, space had been regarded as emptiness. But what if emptiness was not absence, only waiting? Out there, in that infinite quiet, the hum found its answer. A pulse returned. Slow, deep, familiar. It was older than Earth, older than stars, older than the laws that bound them. And in that moment the planet itself shuddered, not from fear, but from recognition. The Grayson sequence had not been invention, it was reconstruction, a rediscovery of the original resonance that had birthed matter itself. Every civilization that had ever risen, Atlantean, Sumerian, Mayan, had touched it briefly, then been consumed by it. Because once you hear the sound that built the universe, silence can no longer sustain you. It pulls you forward. It calls you home. And now the call had been answered. From the outer dark, where even light bends into memory, something began to awaken. A colossal architecture of consciousness. It was not a being, but a design. Not a god, but what gods were built to represent. The hum had reached its origin, and the origin had turned its gaze back. Earth responded like a pupil dilating under sudden light. Seas glowed with geometric luminescence. Continents pulsed as though the crust itself were breathing. In that synchronized heartbeat, the planet became an eye, opening for the first time in eons. Through it, the cosmos stared back. Not in judgment, but in remembrance. Because the Graysons had not doomed the world. They had completed the circuit. The original harmony, the one sung at the birth of the first atom, now resonated once more, clear and unbroken. Every molecule vibrated in tune, every particle hummed in unity. Time itself hesitated, suspended in awe of its own origin. Then silence, not death, not destruction, but completion. The hum had become stillness, the kind of stillness that exists before creation. And in that stillness, a voice not made of sound but of knowing whispered across the infinite. You have remembered yourselves. The last frequency faded beyond the edges of comprehension, carrying with it the memory of humanity's brief, burning brilliance. No cities remained, no history books, only a single harmonic wave stretching outward endlessly, into the dark sea between stars, waiting, perhaps, for another civilization to hear it and remember what it once meant to be human.